Hello and welcome to Building Context. This is a series of tech talks that we're doing to dig into APIs and API security. My name is Chris Westfall. I head up product marketing here at Salt Security. And today, again, I'm joined by Michael Spitsky. He's our technical evangelist. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be here again.
We're happy to have you. And yeah, we've had a bunch of great, I've had a good time having some conversations with you. And this is sort of a continuation of some of the previous conversations. So folks who are watching, if you haven't seen those videos, I encourage you to go back and check out some of the previous videos. We can reference those wherever you're viewing this. But today we're going to talk about, and we've kind of been building up to this, the fact that security teams need to think differently with APIs in the mix. The more you're building API applications, the more you're exposing APIs externally, especially externally into partners, the more it really changes the game on security and the way that you need to protect these applications and protect the APIs. And we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing today, what you need to be thinking about, and then give you some ideas on how to get started. So you can start thinking about how you improve your API security game. So what I want to do, Michael, I know you come from a background at Gartner, and you come from a technical background at Gartner and before that as well, and you've seen a lot and done a lot. But what do you see, especially in your previous conversations, what have you seen a lot of security teams putting their time and effort into?
Yeah, it's a good question, Chris. Quite a few categories. I'd say some of the trends I was seeing, there's certainly a lot of cloud adoption, right? We can't argue that. We've talked about it prior. Some of that's an evolution of infrastructure. Right, IT teams are used to, I have to build a server, right, because a business team needs some application or service, and I have to make sure I have enough capacity or data storage. So there's always been that kind of thinking in IT, like we have to have infrastructure. With data center consolidations, we have to reduce how much equipment we have. It's costing too much, for HVAC and expense and redoing warranties. So cloud kind of came to be almost 20 years ago at this point. So very appealing, right? Like, well, I don't have to incur this cost, and I just pay for what I use. Like, I don't have an idle server. So cloud computing has always kind of had that appeal. Like, certainly for cost factor, but also elasticity, right? If I need more, it's going to be there on demand, as opposed to I have 6 months to procure a server and build this thing up. So IT mindset or infrastructure mindset has always been there. And it's either servers, or it could be networking equipment, but it's always about do I have enough capacity for computing. So we've shifted a lot of that to clouds. So you definitely see heavy ties to cloud engineering and cloud security. The other focus I've seen a lot is more on security operations or SecOps. Kind of renewed as well, with a lot of cybersecurity initiatives in organizations. It's kind of a rebranding of SecOps. So it's kind of we have to watch everything. We have to watch for all types of threats. Make sure you're monitoring all endpoints, all apps, all systems. Except now you're looking at the broad spectrum of all types of threats, right? It could be endpoints, it could be email, it could be IoT, operational technology, might be safety issues. So it's unfortunately kind of overwhelmed a lot of SecOps teams. I heard a lot about SecOps fatigue, and we have too many feeds, right? Like SIM, your Splunk was going to be kind of the center of the universe. And there's always this mission to feed all your data to the SIM, but it got overwhelmed, right? And then SOC analysts didn't know what to even look at. So that's kind of the battle, I'd say, raging in the world of SIMs, and some of that is automation, data analytics to try to unearth useful signals, but looking at a very wide spectrum of potential events. And then you get into things like SOAR to automate SOC analyst workflow. The other big trend I saw was a lot of zero trust, right? Which is kind of an evolution of how you do network security for modern computing, right? You have to acknowledge that network perimeter is kind of eroded, or it's moved out of your data center, right? It's shifting. People can come in from a lot of different locations, but then your computing resources are also shifting and ephemeral, right? Because you're using cloud or containers. So you can't just lock down by IP address space. So yeah, it's a lot. What's that, like three or four, pillars I've seen a big focus. Another is compliance, right? So kind of if we could do everything up front, and spell out everything a security team should do, then everything is going to be secure, right? It's
Yeah.
like you can never know enough, and if you did compile all that, it's hundreds of pages of documentation nobody's going to look at.
Exactly.
So I saw a lot of that, right? And it's kind of organizations would, pick based on, prior history, what was their strong suits, where were teams staffed up. But it usually fell into one of those areas, certainly.
So yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that security teams have their plates full and they're stretched pretty thin. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of those are pretty big initiatives, right? Cloud,
Yeah.
zero trust, thinking about how you're protecting your users. This idea of the dissolving perimeter. Um, while they are investing a lot of time and effort and budget into these initiatives, do any of those do anything to protect APIs?
Yeah, very little, unfortunately, right?
Yeah,
We've kind of talked about this, right? Like some of those traditional controls don't buy you much for, the types of API attacks we see day to day.
yeah,
And, as evidenced by a lot of the incidents and breaches that occur, certainly uptrending, through 2020 and 2021.
yeah,
The other thing I saw was application security. It was lacking, right? It's been lacking. It never really changed, right? Even with DevOps and DevSecOps kind of coming to the forefront. Unfortunately, app focused, it kind of lagged behind, and we see a lot of the same things with APIs, unfortunately.
yeah,
So it's you could say that heavy focus on protect the infrastructure, protect the network paths. Well, then we can protect everything that resides within that, right? So we still see this line of thinking persisting. It's just kind of taken on new forms in cloud computing or zero trust networking,
yeah,
or modernized SIM. But the reality, like we've been talking about, Chris, is like the explosion of APIs, right? The high volumes of them, the high rates of change, and how you develop them. Interconnectedness with partners and suppliers. These modes of thinking and the technology just aren't built for that. So it's
yeah.
definitely a huge blind spot, just like application security was, the past couple decades. API security certainly is a bigger blind spot, you could say.
Yeah, so I think if I can summarize, kind of getting out of that infrastructure only, protecting the infrastructure and expanding your thinking to include applications, and more so today as we're seeing more of these applications being built on APIs, is really thinking about how the APIs need to be protected,
Yep.
and how they're exposing things like sensitive data. Now,
Yeah.
I know a lot of orgs are they're kind of ahead of the curve or trying to stay ahead of the curve, and there's a lot of initiatives to shift left or implement DevSecOps or add sec to the DevOps pile there. What are your thoughts on that, and what did you see?
Yeah, it was you know there was quite a few I'd say a handful of focuses within that, right? I mentioned compliance, right? If we can define all of our security requirements up front, we'll make sure the thing was built securely. So there's definitely a focus of, can I codify all of my compliance and regulatory requirements, translate those into very, technical code level requirements or application security specific requirements, infrastructure requirements, and then ultimately those things become auditable more easily, right?
Yeah,
Through systems, whether it's a GRC platform like Archer or in your build pipelines, right? And that's where organizations really wanted to get to is, everything that development and ops teams are working towards is, it's defined in code. Git is kind of the center of this universe. That's where I'm going to commit code. My CI/CD build pipelines are responsible for pulling in all the pieces of the code, compiling it, and then delivering it. These days, your infrastructure is also code, including network components and servers. So
yeah,
everything is a form of code, and it all kind of flows through your build pipelines. So it's not wrong, right? Like it's a very valid way of thinking. Like, well, I'm generating a lot of code. I know the workflow for engineers and developers. So let's kind of map our security there.
yeah,
The Some of the pitfalls are, the range of tooling you need to audit these different things. It varies, right? Like what you use to audit infrastructure is going to be very different from your application source code. We've talked about SAST and DAST tools, static and dynamic analysis tools for testing your app code. In the world of infrastructure, you need different tools, right? Because now
Yeah.
you're talking about, I might expose a port, or maybe I'm going to stand up a server in the wrong, VPC or VNet. Maybe I'm going to provision the wrong role. So it's a much broader range of things you need to audit for. You could still uh, test them in your build pipelines, but you need that much more tooling. So it's a very very big focus I saw, in a lot of my advisory of organizations was what can I do in my build pipelines as part of DevSecOps? What are the tools I need? How do I automate them fully? Because I can't have somebody manning a console or a GUI. It all has to just be kind of seamless as part of
Yeah.
developer and engineering workflow. And
Well,
that's, yeah.
we talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but how realistic is it that you're going to catch everything in development? You're going to catch
Yeah.
everything before production.
Right, right, and these are, they're issues. These are, if you have to map them, we had in the OWASP API Security Top 10, we've talked about that on prior sessions. But one of them is related to security misconfiguration.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the things you look for in infrastructure as code, right? It's like, well, did I open a port? That's a misconfiguration.
Yeah.
Did I add a service I shouldn't really have on that running server or container? So those things, they are auditable. And when you talk about auditing code, you can look for exploitable types of vulnerabilities, but that's two types of issues, as part of the larger, just the OWASP top 10.
Right.
That's not even all the possible threats, right? So unfortunately, focusing very heavily on automation within build pipelines without considering the bigger picture of like, what am I doing in runtime, right? Or what
Yeah.
am I doing operationally? And maybe I could do some things in design time or raise security awareness. You have to do all these things, right? So often what I saw was an organization might focus too heavily in one area at the expense of the others, and it kind of left them open, right?
Yeah.
Because like you said, you can't test everything. There's never enough time, and tools just aren't built for it, right? Because
Yeah. So even if you could test everything, the tools aren't going to catch things like some of the logic
right, yeah,
vulnerabilities
you
that
need to be
we see
watching in
prevalent.
runtime. Yep.
Yeah. So we're back to security has to do everything. We can't offload all this API security or app security stuff onto the shoulders of development and call it done. So
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway there is finding that balance between what you do at runtime, like you said, and continuing to improve security, pre-runtime and development. I think finding that balance is super important. But if if this is a security professional watching this episode, it seems a bit overwhelming to add yet another thing onto the shoulders of or onto the to-do list, that they have to take care of. So, what would you suggest they do as a next step if we were to try and kind of break this down a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting to try to pick the starting point. I would say if you want an eye-opening experience, we talked about reverse engineering applications and kind of how attackers do that. I would certainly encourage security professionals to do that, like install Burp Suite Community Edition or OWASP Z-Attack Proxy. Listen to the communications that just your web browser sends on a normal web page visit. You're going to see the API communications. Usually that's eye-opening on many levels. For one, it's like there's a lot of traffic, right? You're going to see you might even see security issues right off the bat. You're probably going to be shocked on the number of cookies and privacy issues that might be unearthed. The other is just how much data is visible to you, right? This was a really big one. When I was trying to raise awareness amongst developers, because they did put a lot of faith in TLS and authentication and authorization, because that's what security teams have been telling them, right? Like, well, if you encrypt and if you authenticate, you're good. So that's kind of what they operated under. And then I would show them, like, look, this is how I decrypted your session. I'm man in the middling from my machine. This is how an attacker would do it. This is how I hijacked a session. Like I am the owner of it, and I could pull it from traffic directly or compromise somebody's machine.
Yeah.
And then they got it right. Like, oh, this is how somebody could target APIs directly, and then how do I stop that? That was usually the next question, and usually it was you can't, right? Like that's design. That's how we're building apps.
Right.
So if you're not kind of at that level where you understand like that deeper architecture and how apps and infrastructure work together,
Yeah.
certainly do run a tool like that. the other is, I would strongly encourage move beyond that infrastructure. Like infrastructure is huge, right? It's building blocks. If you're an enterprise architect, it's very valuable knowledge. You understand how apps and systems and networks are built, and that's extremely valuable to API security. So, keep that knowledge, but get more versed on kind of the app design side and coding and how, features are developed very quickly. And then you could see how mistakes would happen, right? A developer might not be versed in architecture, and we wouldn't expect them to be. Like
Yeah.
they wouldn't understand network engineering, like many security practitioners might not. So these are how mistakes are happening, right? It's never anybody's fault. So yeah, I'd say that's a really good starting point. That usually breaks down some of the barriers or reduces some of the friction, right? You could see it's like walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, right? Like let's see the problem they're facing,
It would
as
seem
opposed
like
to
it would
pointing fingers.
make you a pretty valuable resource as well, having that. I would guess that there aren't a lot of folks out there that understand the security infrastructure side of things and the app dev side of things, and can put the two together when it comes to security. So that's super important. And I know there's a lot, and maybe we can spend more time in future episodes talking about how you can sharpen your skill set and start to dig into some of these things more on the application side. But what are some, if you're thinking about it more from an organizational standpoint, what are some of the steps you want to take to understand, kind of the lay of the land and start making improvements when it comes to security?
Yeah. So, I would say some of these questions certainly arise out of DevOps initiatives and DevSecOps, right? Because we talked about everything becomes a form of code,
Yeah.
and modern design APIs are the backbone of it. And infrastructure, a lot of it is API enabled these days, right? When you're working with cloud technologies, there's usually an API at the tail end of that you would invoke, like cloud metadata services. So the APIs are everywhere, right? So it's depending where you sit in that food chain, or the organizational hierarchy, the answer can vary. But if you are an engineer and you're concerned about these problems, raise it to your CIO or CISO. Like these will, the CISO might not know about the problem today, but they will, right, once that API gets targeted, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe development released an API. It's unknown to the organization, right? As we call them, their shadow APIs, but attackers are going to find it, right? You can never launch an app dark. They're looking for your systems and,
Yeah.
and your assets everywhere, right? Because they have all the time in
That's
the
what they
world.
do. So
Yeah.
it's, I
So
mean, in essence, it's best to find the shadow APIs or map your APIs before your attackers do, right? So
yeah,
it's the old
yeah, and
adage
it's
of you can't protect what you can't see, right?
right, and that's how a lot of application security guidance would go. As I advised organizations, like if you're thinking about a holistic application security program, start with inventory. You
Yeah.
need to know all of the apps in your environment. DAST at one point could have been an option for that. Scan your entire IP address space. Unfortunately, as we've said, apps are very disconnected and dispersed. They're connecting to cloud environments, different partners. They don't all live in your data center. So
Yeah.
getting that full inventory is usually challenging for organizations. They don't even know where to start. And it seems like the most basic thing, like how do you not have an inventory? And it's not your CMDB, like
Right.
it's stale data. It's somebody came up with that. That's what they thought the design was, and it tends not to have the application or API level data
Yeah.
that you need to actually protect things.
Well, I think in addition to that catalog, obviously understanding what the criticality of those APIs are tied to with regard to the business, right? Are they revenue driving? Are they high
Yep.
value APIs? Also understanding what sensitive data they might expose. Kind of getting ahead of maybe some of the compliance questions that might be coming if you're not already getting those compliance questions. Thinking about those things. I always think too is understanding what's happening on the other side of the fence as a security practitioner, understanding what DevOps is already doing to help to kind of improve security on that side. And then you've mentioned this, in this episode and in previous episodes is looking to see what can be done in runtime. I think balancing, trying to correct if we've overcorrected on the DevOps side, correct and find that balance between, runtime protection and improvement on the DevOps side, that's something we want to strive for. Maybe something we can talk more about in future.
Yeah,
Future
yeah, and I
episodes.
definitely want to dive deeper on that, Chris, because a lot of times what I would see is runtime might be owned by a network engineering team, and they
Yeah,
don't often have the application level subject matter expertise, and that's it's a tough spot,
it's a
right? It's
challenge.
not
Yeah,
network's fault because they're trying to secure everything. It's not the application team's fault because they have no visibility into network, components and infrastructure. But that's a big gap, right? Because
yeah.
that's where a lot of your runtime controls will exist. So yeah, we should absolutely dig deeper on that.
Awesome. Well, I think hopefully we've given folks some good things to think about. Hopefully we haven't gotten them too anxious about what else they need to be adding to their pile of responsibilities when it comes to security. But Michael, as always, thank you for coming on and sharing some of your insights. We
Yeah, no
look
problem,
forward to
Chris.
having you
It was good.
again on a future one. Yep,
Happy to
and
help.
we'll see you soon. Thank you all.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right,
Chris.
bye.